This episode will consist of topics around domestic abuse, domestic violence and sexual violence. If you require any support or help, please get in contact with your local domestic abuse, sexual violence organisation. In the UK, you can call the National Domestic Helpline on 0808 2000 247. And if you are listening overseas, please contact your national helpline where support, advice and guidance. Hello, and we've got another episode for you this week. Please like, share, subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And I hope that you enjoy this week's conversation. Hello everyone, thank you for joining us this week. I've got an amazing guest that I can't wait to speak to, and I'm going to introduce him, but he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself and who he is before we get into the nitty-gritty. I really hope that you enjoy listening to this week's conversation, because I've got an exciting subject that we're going to be talking about and some points from his book. So, yes, Dr. Newman, welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
How are you? Feeling nervous?
I'm not nervous, no.
I'm
unsure what we're going to talk about, but I'm looking forward to it.
So, Craig, tell me a little bit about who you are. Introduce yourself to our listeners, your background. Yeah, all the things about you.
All the things about me, I mean, that could take longer than probably the listeners want to listen to. I'm a clinical psychologist by background, and as many people know, I'm also a survivor of domestic abuse. And out of that experience and many years of training I took it upon myself really to try and develop a recovery model, and really to try and offer a different perspective on what comes after escape, a story of hope and a journey towards how people might achieve a good life that feels very empowered. And as you know, I wrote a book called Get Out, Get Love, what everyone should know in and after abusive relationships. And I can talk more about that title as well if you'd like, because that's raised some interesting reactions in people. And I guess I'm here because I know that you have read the book, haven't you?
I have. Yeah, let's start with that then. Why the title Get Out, Get Love?
I mean, I think the first thing is that, psychologists we're not famous for being able to say things quickly. So, we're not succinct. We're highly likely to talk for an hour rather than 10 seconds. So the title Get Out Love really summarizes what the book's about in the best way I could think of in the shortest words, which is supporting people to get out of a domestic abuse situation, or get out of cycles of abuse, or get out of, the emotions that come after we have left abuse, and to get love. And it's that word love that draws the most reaction. And some people, mind the pun, they either love it or they really don't get it. But it's intentional. And the reason I've used that word is because I've had years of clinical training. I mean, thousands and thousands of formal days of training. And no one has ever used the word love ever in my training, which is phenomenal, given how many of us want it and how often we say it in our lives. And I really think it's important to recognize that domestic abuse is for everybody really, or majority of people, was at some point a love story, definitely went wrong. And when we leave domestic abuse, interesting, I keep saying domestic abuse, but I prefer the phrase abusive relationships, because I think that there's a lot of association with the term domestic abuse and violence, but I do want to think much bigger than that. But when I say abusive relationships, I'm definitely including violence. But when we leave those relationships, we do need a form of love to be able to recover. And the love I'm referring to is self-love. It's that ability to really build in yourself what you might have been looking for in the wrong people.
I did read the book, and this is, I don't know what I was expecting when I read it, because like working in this field, you read a lot. You're reading the current research, you're reading different legislation, you're reading and making sure that you're equipped to be able to understand from a theoretical point of view, I guess, the journey of abuse, to be able to articulate that in a way that makes sense for those people experiencing it. So I'm used to reading quite a lot of books, educational books, research papers. So I think that my thoughts were, as I got the book, that it was going to be very much like that, and that from a professional perspective I would take a step back and read it from a professional lens. But what actually happens was that it very quickly became a personal read rather than a professional. And I hope that makes sense, that actually I wasn't expecting to read it and actually go on my own journey with the book. So I
Yeah.
think that was the number one thing that I got from it. And it wasn't a bad thing. It didn't expect it. So it wasn't a bad thing. But I also noted that when you start theorizing abusive relationships, toxic, it becomes quite academic within the terminology. And your book was very easy to read.
Maybe that says something about me. I mean, that book took 4 years to write, and it involved lots of people giving me feedback. I don't think the first version was easy to. I mean, in truth, it's the second book, because the first one I deleted. It was so awful. But I think that I really like that you're using the word journey, because that's the intent of the book, to say to people, recovery is a journey. It's not a single moment, and you can expect to go backwards and forwards, but it is a journey. And I tried to write a book that reflected something of my own journey and the journey I've seen lots of other people take that I've worked with, but also a journey that for you as the reader has lots of choices in it. It's not saying do it like this. It's saying, there's a journey and there's things in it you could use, and there's things you might know that you probably don't know. And your reaction actually is fascinating. It's something I did not expect. But right from when the book was first written, we sent it out for review. We sent it to domestic abuse therapists, sent it to 8 initially, and 2 of them left their husbands halfway through that process. And that's not a surprise, I guess, in that I'm a clinician who also hadn't been aware of my own situation. But it really, well, I mean, it is a surprise for me, because at the time I did not think the book would have that much of a reaction in people. And consistently, that is what I hear, which has been really validating for me, I guess, and has really pushed us to try and spread the word on this project.
It really captured, there's some great books out there that really kind of make you understand some stuff from that theory, but it's almost written from a distance, if that makes any sense. It's like, this is what it should look like and this is what that means. But it really captured some of those thoughts and feelings. And I'm guessing because you're the author and you had your own experiences, I don't know if that was an intentional part of the process of writing the book or what it was, but it was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I never really thought about it like that. Actually, he's just captured everything I was thinking on my own personal journey, but couldn't really articulate in a way. So it was really eye-opening from that perspective, that you really managed to capture those thoughts, feelings, doubts, insecurities, all of that comes with actually recognizing that actually maybe my relationship is unhealthy, or maybe I've parked that and I need to revisit that, or whatever the circumstances are, for somebody as they're reading it. But you really captured things that most books don't capture. Was that the intent?
I mean, it's interesting when you ask, people sometimes ask who I was writing the book for. And I guess that, like, on some level, I wish I had a time machine. I was writing the book for me. So
Mm.
what should I have read at that point in my life that would have answered questions that I really struggle with? Um, and it's fascinating to even realize I did struggle, given the amount of training I've had, the level of qualification, that when I left, I mean, I wrote somewhere, because I'm writing another book that's about the kind of theory that underpins it. But I did some calculation that I've had about 6,000 days of clinical training, And that's not a probably an underestimate. You know, I've done more than one doctorate. I'm a bit of a addict to training. No one has ever in all of my training talked about a domestic abuse recovery model.
Mm,
So they talk about trauma, we talk about these little parts of recovery. And when I came out of that relationship and was very conscious of the challenge that firstly I hadn't noticed it, and secondly, how do you recover? I realized I just didn't have many answers. What I did have was how it felt, and I had these stories and experiences of witnessing many people recover. What I wrote in the book, and I would say the book was probably part of my own therapy, which is why I encourage so much writing for other people in the book, is I just reveal that confusion. I guess that's
mm.
most, I don't know, I felt quite nervous doing that when I wrote it, and still probably have some level of nervousness because as clinicians, we're really trained to never share very much about ourselves. But I was so amazed by how disempowered you could feel by being confused that I wanted to share that so the reader would feel validated, to be like, Christ, if I can be confused, you've got
Mm.
all the right in the world to find this very disarming and confusing. And I offered that as a therapeutic device to the reader, to you really. So do you think that's what you picked up on when you're?
Definitely. And I like the way that it was kind of sectioned up. And I don't want to give too many spoilers because I really want to encourage people to read it. But there were some things that I was like, oh, I need to have a discussion, a conversation about some of that stuff that I was like, okay, that's interesting. I never really thought of it from that way. But what I really liked about it was it's almost like split up into three parts. So I know that you call them acts, like act one, act two, act three. But as I was reading, it was almost like beginning, middle, end. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I really liked of, and it felt as I was reading it, not only was I going through my own personal journey at the time, I didn't realize I was like, and when I say my own personal journey, I didn't just leave my husband. Like I'm talking stuff that you park away, that you don't forget about, that you look away, that you don't really, that you kind of distance yourself from your own experiences. So that's what I meant by, oh, okay, like that was interesting because I didn't expect an emotional personal response. I thought I was reading it from a professional perspective in order to
Mhm.
do this, but I like the way that it was cut up in the sections. And what I really liked, and what you've just said actually, is that it is such a confusing time. It's like, it's almost, I want to swear but I'm not, because I don't know who's going to be listening, but it is like, what, when you take a step back or when you're out of it, you look back and you go, what the F? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you've got no words to explain what the F is. You just know that it was really bad. And actually, like, you, how it's written and, you know, really explaining it kind of goes, oh wow, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It is confusing and it is disorientating, and it can almost feel like you're going to be stuck in this place. So reading it absolutely did what you wanted it to do, was to get the reader to go on a journey, but gave hope that actually all is not lost and that there is a way forward through it. But I also, and this is where the first part, I think it was, I don't even know how early into the book it was, but it was the first part that I was like, hang on a minute, I never even thought about it from that perspective ever. And I've been doing this job for a long time, is when where you explain that actually these relationships can be quite addictive.
Yeah. In the domestic abuse world, they refer to something called trauma bonding that you
Mm,
will have come across, I'm sure. And I actually think that's quite a confusing
mm,
phrase. I don't particularly like it either, because I think, to me, the word bonding is something I'd like to preserve for mothers and children and all these people, all these healthy relationships. And I understand why the word's used. It's to take away a sense of blame. But there's another theory that also takes away blame, and that is addiction. And the reason that takes away blame is because we know humans, we get addicted to stuff. There's a lot of
mm,
people, a lot of celebrities that have become addicted to things. And we don't just get addicted to drugs, we can become addicted to exercise, to gambling, to climbing mountains. You know, humans, we unfortunately, if things are very exciting, we can become addicted to them. And that's right. So within these relationships, there is this cycle of drama,
Mm,
and that cycle happens so many times, and we become scared or even terrified and then calm, and terrified and then calm, in a cycle that becomes like almost neurologically, biologically reinforced. And yes, when we leave the relationship, we left with some problems. Our bodies expect that drama cycle, but even worse, when we become very fearful and we're expecting it, the only way we calm down is when our partner eventually becomes relaxed and sometimes even loving again. But when you've left, your partner doesn't do that. So biologically, your brain knows only one place to get peace. Very weirdly, that is back with your ex.
mm,
So at a biological level, even though it's irrational, we feel this pull back because the stress we're feeling, we
mm,
only know one way to stop it,
mm.
and that is to please our ex. And that's a very, very challenging concept for us to understand. But when we do understand it, it absolutely liberates us from all
Mm,
these guilts and feelings
mm.
like, oh, I must love them because I'm being pulled back. And that's why, I've tried to offer it as a very simple theory away from what I think is more complex trauma bonding, where they've bundled a lot of these things together.
Well, it's a simple theory, but it's a very powerful theory because once you kind of recognize that actually that need, that chasing of that feeling where all is good, and then it's mixed with the bad, and you're chasing that good feeling within the relationship, where the dopamine is kind of, yeah, that's feeding that love that I need, whatever is going on, and you're not getting it. That actually, when you stand back and go, actually, I'm an addict to this. I need this. This is like my drug. I personally have had an addiction journey. So I've never associated my addiction journey with ex relationships. What I associated it with the substances that I misused in order to cope with what was going on at that particular time. And so when I was reading it, and that's why I was like, well, hang on a minute, I'm going on a little bit of a journey, because once you acknowledge that and go, wow, that's what was happening at the time, then that's where that place of validation, healing, whatever, kind of comes from. But that's the same with any addiction, is that you've got to recognize there was a problem first in order to be able to tackle the problem, if that makes any sense. Do you know what I mean?
In the world of addiction, they talk about naming the dragon before you can slay it. So that's right. So only by realizing that that cycle is a problem, you've then got to understand how to get out of it. And getting out of it is very complex. It isn't just leaving. As you know, staying away becomes the next challenge. And that's even more complicated with co-parenting and divorces and all these other things where your partner isn't necessarily immediately gone. And in the book, yes, so probably for people who need to know, I go on to try and help you understand how you actually do that. So it's not just giving you theories, but understanding and saying to you, and this is why, I really do believe in trying to empower people. One of the benefits of understanding this as addiction versus trauma bonding is we know how to treat addictions. Like we've got lots of methods to support that. And on top of that, we know how to re-regulate emotions. We can start packaging this together. Bit more complicated to understand, how do you treat trauma bonding, because it's not so classically understood. But if I ask somebody on the street, how would you treat an addiction to alcohol? They'd say, stay away from alcohol. So how do you treat an addiction to an abusive ex? It's actually very simple math. You stay away from the abusive ex, even though you should expect that you'll want to go back to them. And that's
And
what confuses people, isn't it?
that is that cycle, like, it's that addiction cycle, that you recognize that there's a problem, you want to do something about the problem, then you're actioning that, going to meetings, whatever. And then part of that, and again, I don't think that there is any shame in that relapse bit, because it's the relapse that actually makes you stronger. So the relapse could be that you go back to your ex, or it could be that that you're free from the ex, but then you're going into another relationship, and that relationship is equally, if not more, abusive. And it's that bit that actually, it doesn't just have to necessarily be that one relationship, it's the pattern and the cycle that has followed since. That was what was really enlightening for me anyway, when I was reading it, going, yeah, Yeah, now I see the pattern. Now I recognize what I was seeking, what I was doing, because there is a sense of there is no victim or survivor that is responsible for any of the abuse that they have experienced. But there is an interaction that goes on, like with that, be that with ourselves or within that relationship per se. So that we do need to take a little bit of accountability, I guess, of our own thoughts and feelings that are mixed in with this within this cycle, just like you would with any addiction. So it was really
Yeah,
empowering for me anyway, as I was reading it, going, wow, yeah, now I see it. Now I see the pattern. And then you put in the steps to avoid going to the pub or going out or doing this, whatever the addiction was at that time, you know, you put in those safety measures. And so you then have the danger of putting up your barriers, or you're putting all these defenses around you where you're not doing the let's get love bit. So
yeah,
it
that's
was
right.
really, it was a really, really powerful.
I mean, one of the core messages coming from what you've just said there is I do a big driver within the book is to help people not to feel regret, but also alongside that is building up accountability to basically say, look, you can't regret the things you did not know, but you, having now stepped up to turn up for yourself, which is a phrase I use quite often, and to see what was going on and what you need to heal. Now you are accountable. So moving forwards, you have to do the work to not turn up for abuse. I mean, we have to recognize we did turn up for abuse, but we didn't know.
Mm,
Now we are learning and becoming aware, there is a choice. It may be the first time you've made that
mm,
choice, and it's not an easy choice because you're going to have to fight against a lot of impulses and a lot of behaviors, and for some people, the consequences of trauma. But I believe it's a choice that people can take, and
mm,
I've seen people, and we're getting so much feedback from the book, and as I should mention, there's a digital version as well, a program that Esther, in fact, have just commissioned for East Surrey, so which helps people to go on that journey. But both of them require you to actually want to be
mm,
empowered and to act on that power, and it takes time for different people to arrive in that place. And I agree, shame is it's incredibly complex part of all of this because when we are very ashamed, we don't just avoid help from others, we avoid ourselves as well.
mm,
We don't want to even look at our own shame.
mm,
And so, we do a lot of work in the program to help you to remove that feeling as
mm.
well.
I don't like to use enjoy around such difficult subject because obviously you've had experiences, I've had experiences, I deal with people's experiences. It's not an enjoyment, it's not joyful to go through that. So I don't like to use the word enjoy, but I did get an awful lot out of reading the book.
I don't think it is enjoyable, and I wouldn't want to set that expectation.
Mm,
I work in this space as a therapist. I work with people recovering from domestic abuse, and I should add, the Get Out, Get Love program, the book, is designed for people who have just left. In fact, people who are still in a relationship, if it's safe to read it, through to people who've
mm,
maybe, like, I don't know what your situation is, but people 20, 30 years
mm,
later who are still got baggage and confusion, or they find that it affects their new relationships in some way. And when I work, one of the first things I say when people come to me in the therapeutic capacity is, you're probably not going to want to come back. I'm going to be working in a space where it's not comfortable
mm,
because you're going to have to look at those parts of yourself that enabled you to be abused. And what's really hard for us to understand is that for some of us, we can tolerate abuse because we get flashes of
mm,
self-worth given to us, but having to be on our own and look at why we don't feel self-worth and self-love is very hard
mm,
sometimes and feels impossible to recover from. And I guess that I'd like to say to people who are interested in that, you can recover
yeah.
from that. I definitely have seen people say to me things like, I read a part of the book or I listened to a part of the program, and I didn't even know what self-love was until
Mm,
I'd heard that. And suddenly I'm like, wow, not only had I not thought it was that, but I want that.
mm,
Like, how
mm,
do you get it? And that when that spark arrives, that's the work then, is to
mm,
work that out. And it doesn't come in a flash.
mm,
It takes time. And I say to people, if you want a prediction of how long, you're talking 9 to 18 months would be my prediction of the amount of
mm,
work you've got to spend to actually fully feel that you are turning up for yourself and you are feeling in yourself the thing that you may have been seeking from other people that you dated or had relationships with. And that isn't just a made up figure. That's kind of what I've seen. And it's why, in the book I say, if you read this quickly, you've got to go back to it.
And I want to talk a little bit about self-love in a minute or two, because I think that that is extremely important thing that share with people, because perpetrators have fed into the lies that we potentially told ourselves, and so that can be very difficult, and actually acknowledging that we're important can be extremely painful for some people. So I want to pick that up in a second, but what I want to go back to is that you bring in an anagram of what is called FOGS. And I just wanted to kind of ask you just to explain what you meant by that acronym, because often there is like that fog in the brain that is dulling everything, that we can't really see very far. We can only see a little bit, which is exactly what happens in deep fog, but you captured it in the anagram and the explanation of the feelings all in one.
I mean, the anagram FOGS originally as fear, obligation, guilt, which I can't take all the credit for. I came across that in the codependency literature, and it is kind of about people being their reality being confused by these three primary emotions. I developed and expanded on that. That's right. So I was very interested in shame alongside that, which is why I called it the FOGS. And then in the book, I really demonstrate how fear, so that can be fear, anxiety, stress, real dread, all those emotions, obligation, which is those kind of feelings of what you should do this for your partner, should do this in society, should stay for the kids, those types of shoulds that we all have. Guilt, all the things you think you've done wrong, and then shame, which absolutely runs riot for people. And I make the point that these emotions, it's very difficult concept to say in a short amount of time, but they're kind of like friends, weirdly. They're coping systems. They help us cope with abuse. Now, really, we should just leave abuse, but we don't, because we're kind of groomed and shaped into it. And so we develop coping systems that help us to keep our partners happy, and they are fear, obligation, guilt, and shame. When we leave the relationship, unfortunately, these four friends, they pack a bag as well, and they come with us, and they run riot in our lives. So they make us afraid of the future, afraid of what will be like. Can we ever find a new lover? All that kind of stuff. Then all the guilt of leaving our partner, of upsetting them, of taking the children away from a partner. And then the shame that comes of having been a person who's weak and an abuse victim and all of that stuff. And my whole point is that all needs pulling into check. You've got to understand them, and you've got to learn how to soothe them, because they are your friends. They're built into you, and you can definitely have them in your life. And we should all have a bit of fear, obligation, guilt, and shame, because they're there for a reason, but they shouldn't be in the driving seat, and they shouldn't be clouding reality. So I try to just give those four primary emotions. I know there's obviously other emotions, but it's a place for you to learn how to manage your relationship with these parts of yourself. And they're parts we cannot stand. They're awful, aren't they? I mean, shame in particular, but being afraid, all of these things are awful, but we can't just throw them away. They're us. So we've got to learn how to have a relationship with them, in that they have less power. And one of those is how you regulate them. And then moving into what you're about to talk about, what you replace it with, which is a different sense of positive relationship with yourself.
And then like that does go on nicely to what I want to explore, is that
Sounds
concept.
scripted.
I know, it's like we rehearsed this. It's like that self-love, like what does that look like? What does that mean? The self-soothing, that actually it's okay in this moment to think of what I need, like that self bit of I need something, so I'm not trying to be validated by people that don't want to validate me. Do you know what I mean? So it's that actually it stems from how I see myself, and that could be from experiences from childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, first relationship, of where was that moment that actually I felt that I didn't matter as much as the next person, because that's where it comes from, isn't it? Is that I'm
Yeah.
very good as a mother, caring and needing for my children. As an advocate, I'm very good at giving advice and guidance and support to my clients, but actually, what about me? And that can be uncomfortable when not only have you got these friends that are keeping you from knowing oneself, but actually being confronted with, actually, isn't that a little bit selfish? Isn't that those same feelings that you get from the shame or the guilt or whatever, going, oh, I can't do this for myself because actually that's stopping me from being a good mum because I need something.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you a story rather than telling you what I wrote about, because I think this is really important, because there's always a risk that I'm like the wise, self-proclaimed wise clinician on a hill telling people love yourself. I mean, I can't stand all those memes are like, you just need to love yourself and a picture of a puppy, because they don't really tell us. I definitely could not do this.
No.
And I don't even know if I put it in the book because I can't remember now. But when I left, I remember someone saying, just go and buy yourself
Yeah,
things.
you did put it. Yeah.
And I remember going, okay, I'm just going to go out and treat myself. And I couldn't connect with anything that I wanted. And I'd say that I still have to do work on that. And I say to most people I work with, it's always going to be something you have to work on. Like, but I do work on it. And a story I've never actually said out loud really anywhere else. But at that point in my time in my life, my life was very hard. My father came to live with me for a while to help. And then when he left, he'd just written on all the mirrors in my house things about me that I should value. He clearly caught on that the way I talked about myself was very self-blaming, because this was very early. And I was just struck by how far away that was from how I felt about myself. Like,
Mm,
how could somebody else like see all this value that I could not see? And you might recognize that's a task now, in that's where it came from. So I was like, I'm keeping these things on the mirror. Like, my job is to believe that.
mm,
Like,
mm,
how do I get from seeing that as, it's a classic thing that if I say to people who I meet in therapy, tell me a positive thing about yourself, it all goes quiet, like they really struggle, or they give me, very basic things that are not really about them. That ability to absolutely connect with your own worth is something I had to work out. And it was not something that all my years as a therapist had really trained me to do. I don't think therapy is really about that quite often. And you're right, it's even harder because of all this other stuff telling you you're wrong, and many
mm,
years potentially of somebody else telling you you're the opposite of that. And so what you have in the book is really the process I worked out to do it, which took me years to really even affect for me, and then years working with other people to feel convinced it could be spread to others. But I guess what I'd like to say out loud is I absolutely connect with how
mm,
hard that is. So when I
mm,
say to people, you can do it, it's not because I've read it in a book. I remember having no sense of what I needed for me, and having no sense of why I'd be worth even trying to answer that question
mm,
either. So the work I did now, I feel very different now, and I really do understand my own value. And part of that is in now doing this and being able to speak
mm,
to you in this way. And I really encourage other people to
mm.
recognize that when I say self-love, you're going to think that's not me. And that's the reason I've given you that story there.
And it's retraining the brain. What I loved about what you've just said is that there absolutely, it takes work. It takes effort, just like being addicted to this to stay clean or whatever it may be. It takes work, and that often is a daily. It's a daily walk. It's a daily struggle. Sometimes it could be life throws you a curveball. That actually it is going to take time, and nobody's going to shy away from that. But there is hope on the other side of that feeling of fear, guilt, obligation, shame, all of the shitty things that your perpetrator has made you believe about yourself, that actually, with time, with effort, with just validating yourself on a daily basis, actually you will see yourself in a different light, and you will recognize your own self-worth. And that is very uncomfortable. I, as a professional, still very struggle with how I see myself. It's very easy for me to be very self-critical and very negative, and very hard for me to take validation, because I'm like, no, 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 that's not for me, that's for the next person. So even for me, with my, strength of gobbiness and assertiveness or whatever else, still struggle with it. So nobody's going to say it's easy, but you absolutely, and for anybody that is listening, I really want to kind of encourage you that actually where you're at right now is not where you're going to be at in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And where you're at and what you're thinking now is going to be very, very different if you just validate yourself.
Yeah, and I know it's a bit like a plug, but I think you do need a guidebook.
Mm.
Oh, turns out I've got one. But I do think it is like it's incredibly hard to know how you do
Mm.
that. And I've met many people who've been through therapies and coaching and read many books and have not actually worked that out, because whatever they did had not been specifically created for somebody who'd been domestically abused by someone they loved. And that type of abuse, it's unfortunately usually for a long time, and it's usually thousands of incidents. And to unpack that and to retrain yourself, you've got to have an intentional plan. It's not enough just to say, I'm going to change,
Mm.
because as you've just said, like it becomes automatic to just feel that you shouldn't have a thing. And there's nothing pushing you to change unless you've basically decided to do a package of work that makes you not
Mm.
push that away. And that story I just gave you, I kept those things on my mirror because I could have been like, well, clearly he's my dad, he's biased, he sees things that I don't see. But I chose instead to say, well, actually, it's me that's the problem. I
Mm.
have to feel that without
Mm.
someone needing to tell me. And I think that's the primary goal. As long as you need someone to be giving you worth, you're at risk, aren't you?
Mm.
You
And
attract the
where
wrong people.
where can our listeners get your guidebook? I highly, highly, highly recommend that if you really want to understand, what's going on, the feelings that you're feeling, I highly recommend you read the book, because it has the ability, if you work it, to change not only your life but how you see yourself. So where can our listeners get the resource to do the book or the program?
So the two routes really, I mean, the cheapest, if you want to call it that, is the book, and it's where it all came from. And the most obvious place is Amazon. That's where there is a publisher, Sheldon Press, who are under Hachette, who say send them to Amazon because they might review it, which apparently is a good thing. The alternative is, if you want a more substantial, longer route, you can go to getoutgetlove.com, where we have a program people can access. It costs money for most people, but it's meant to be a lot, significantly cheaper than therapy.
Mm.
Obviously, if you're in East Surrey, you can, I think from next week, you can go to your ESDA website and you can get it for free because it's been commissioned. And there are other regions in the UK that are picking it up. And if you're with a domestic abuse service, I suppose you could ask them if it's something they would pick up for you. But the fastest and the most accessible, and really I think it's only about 11 or 12 pounds at the moment, is Amazon.
Great. So I put the links in the description of the episode, and that will take you directly to Amazon and the website. Please go and have a look. If you do buy the book, leave Dr. Craig Newman a review from a professional and a personal perspective. Thank you for the book. I'm sorry that you had to experience what you experienced in order to write the book, but your experiences, your knowledge will help so many people. So thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me, and also this work that you're doing, which will also help lots of people.